Well, hello and welcome to my tutorial video on how to create a choose-your-own-adventure style story using Google Slides. I'm sure you remember from your childhood those short novels, choose-your-own-adventure books where your protagonist was on an adventure, and every so often you would come to a decision that you had to make, and based on the decision that you chose, you were told to go to a certain page in the novel to continue the story. So you were kind of the one in charge of the ultimate outcome of your character based on the decisions that you made. Well, this is a way to kind of incorporate that style of storytelling into Google Slides that you could use in your classroom. Before we get started in explaining how that all works, I wanted to let you know that I did get this idea from Google's Applied Digital Skill Curriculum. That the link to that curriculum is right there. If you haven't checked this out, it's a really interesting program that Google has put together on taking digital skills that we're trying to foster in our students and really applying them to specific situations. So instead of just learning how to use a Google Doc or how to create a Google Slide presentation, it gives you some sort of real-world application of what to do with those skills. So really check out Google's Applied Digital Skills curriculum if you like this particular lesson, because this is where I got the idea from. Before we get into the exactly how to create this Choose Your Own Adventure, I want to just show you an example of a story that I put together using Google Slides. This one's I called The Forest. So we'll just go through it quickly so you can kind of see what a final product might look like. Creating these can be time consuming, the more in-depth and more choices that you want to include. So I will warn you of that, but I think your students will find it very interesting and fun to do. So here's my story. We're going to click here to begin our adventure. And we just begin with sort of a beginning prompt. So you awake from a deep sleep to find yourself in the middle of a dark forest. You have no idea how you got there. You look around, you're completely alone. What's your first move? At that point, we have three choices at the bottom, three different text boxes of different things we can do. We can stay where we're at and wait for help. We can start walking north, or we can start walking south. All three of these choices are going to be linked to a different slide in this Google Slide deck based on our choice. So if I choose to stay where I'm at and wait for help, that's going to take me to this slide. So I chose to wait. After waiting for hours, no help has arrived. I'm getting extremely hungry. I'm next to a bush that has some wild berries on it. What should I do? And now I have four choices. I can eat the berries, I can start walking north, I can start walking south, I can stay where I'm at, but do not eat the berries. So if I choose to eat the berries, we're going to see that I've died. The berries were poisonous and now I'm dead. Now I can start my story over, and I'm back to the first part of the story. So if your students don't like the outcome that they end up with, they can start over and see where else their adventure might take them. Now I know the fastest way to get to the end of the story, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to choose to start walking south. Again, I'm going to grow hungry. I'm going to choose to go hunting. I've got three different animals I can choose to hunt. I'm going to select to hunt the deer. I'm going to be successful in hunting the deer. Then I stumble across a group of people who are camping. I can either ask them for help or turn around. I'm going to choose to ask them for help, and they're going to be a friendly group that get me home safely. And then I chose to end this story once the students get home safely with a writing prompt that they can do a creative writing activity that kind of piggybacks off of that particular story. Now again, I got through that pretty quickly because I knew the direct route, the fastest route to get home and get to this prompt. But if we look at kind of the skeleton of my slide deck, there are 21 different slides that were a part of this story. Some of them end in death, as you can see. Some of them get you home. That's kind of how a Choose Your Own Adventure story works. So that's kind of what the final product looks like. So let's go back to discussing how we go about making one of these. Excuse me. So there are basically two different ways to look at a Google Slide presentation, and I think the way that we're used to looking at it is in a very linear fashion, which means we just start at slide number 1 and we click the space bar or we click our mouse and it takes us to slide 2 and slide 3 and so on until we get to the end of the slide presentation. So if you are giving a presentation to a group of people, that's probably how you're going to be utilizing Google Slides in a very linear fashion. But what we did with that Choose Your Own Adventure story is we used a more linked progression instead of a linear one. Any image or text box that you put in a slide presentation can have a link attached to it. So when you're in presentation mode and you click on that text box or that image, it will take you either to an external link. You could link it to a website that's not connected to your slides at all, and it would take you to that website, or you can link it directly to any of the slides in your slide deck. So when you click on it, you won't necessarily go to the next slide. You'll go to whatever slide you linked to that image or that text box. So to do that, it's basically a 3-step process. You would start by selecting a text box or the image. So if I wanted to select this cartoon character here, you would click on that. Then you would click on this insert link icon here that's at the top toolbar. When you click on that, that opens a toolbar down here at the bottom where you could either paste in an external website link that you would go to when clicking that image, or you could select slides in this presentation, and when you click on that, a drop-down menu would open and you could select which slides you wanted to go to. So to sort of give you an example of what that looks like, I'm going to get out of presentation mode here, and let's just go back to this slide. If I wanted to create a link for this particular image, I would click the image, click on the insert link, which opens up this. Again, I can type a website here, or if I choose slides in this presentation, I get a drop-down menu with all of my slides in this presentation that I could click on, and then that would send me to that particular slide when I clicked on the image. So to go back to my Choose Your Own Adventure, that's what was happening there. When, for example, this slide, when you click on Start Over, it's linked to go to slide 2. I would suggest, if you're doing this Choose Your Own Adventure, you'll notice that most of my slides have a title at the top. I found that helpful to have a title at the top of the slide, so when you went to choose which slide you wanted to link it to, you could find the title that you wanted to link it to, because once you get a bunch of different slides in here, you're not going to remember what slide number 20 was, and if you don't give it a title, it's just going to say slide number 20. But this one says slide 20, Hunt Bear, so I know anytime I want to link to the Hunt Bear slide to look for that title. So that's just a hint when you get to making your own. There are other applications and uses for this linking of Google Slides in your classroom other than just a Choose Your Own Adventure book. I think the most common use that I've seen is for, like, if you wanted to create a review game, like a Jeopardy style review game, you could place an image of a Jeopardy board on a slide. You would have your different categories, you would have your different point values, and so when they clicked on a specific category and point value, you could link that to a specific slide in your deck that has that particular question that connects to that category or that point value. So that's another way you could use this idea of linking slides instead of doing the linear slide presentation. Okay, so let's talk about actually making a Choose Your Own Adventure Google Slides story. Again, I see you having your students do this more than you creating your own very often. Either works, obviously, but I think if you're allowing your students to kind of come up with their own stories, and especially if you have them working in groups on this, you're going to be fostering creativity and critical thinking and collaboration all in one activity. So I would suggest you break your students up into maybe groups of 3. And the first thing they need to do is sort of the pre-planning of their 3 categories they need to think about. Start with your setting. Where is your story going to take place? So maybe they brainstorm on a Google Doc different setting possibilities. I chose a forest for my example. But you could say we're going to have our story take place on Mars. Once you choose your setting, then think about your characters. Now, in a Choose Your Own Adventure book, usually the protagonist is the reader. It's the you, whoever's reading. But other characters are going to be involved in your story. So who might you encounter if your story was taking place on Mars? So maybe they brainstorm some ideas, Martians or aliens, other space travelers. So what characters might they be including in their story? And then what are the obstacles that they might face in their setting with these characters? What are the problems they're going to encounter? And it's these obstacles that your choices are going to come from. You run into a group of Martians. Do you run away from them? Do you try to befriend them? Okay, so they need to come up with a list of potential problems or obstacles. Once that part of the planning is finished, then they really need to sit down, and I know this looks complicated because it kind of is. They need to sit down, and I would suggest on a big piece of paper, they really map out. Maybe you create some kind of a graphic organizer for them, something that looks similar to this. But basically, they're going to have the introduction. How does the story start? And then they need to make a choice about something. They could have 2 choices, 3 choices. I think a good rule of thumb is however many students are in the group, that would be a good jumping off point. So if I have 3 people in a group, I have my introduction part of the story, and then they have to make 3 choices. And then you could assign each choice to a different group member. So group member number 1 would say, okay, if I chose this, what's going to happen and what's the next problem I'm going to encounter? When I encounter that problem, I have to make a choice. And then those choices, I'm going to counter another problem and another choice. So it's going to grow exponentially. That's why it kind of gets complicated to organize, and you really need to map it out. So when you start translating this into the actual slides, you can kind of check off which ones you've completed. So this is going to be probably the most tedious part for your students, but it does again foster that collaboration and that critical thinking that I think is going to pay off. And then ultimately, once they kind of have that skeleton done, then they can jump into Google Slides, collaborate on the same slide. Obviously, somebody creates it and then shares it with their group members, and then you create your adventure. You start making 1 slide for every potential choice. A tip for your students is when they think they're finished, to put the slide deck in presentation mode and really go through it 3, 4, 5 times, making different choices each time, because I found when I made my example about the forest, there were 2 or 3 text boxes I forgot to link. So when you clicked on it, you didn't go anywhere. So you can kind of catch any errors you made by actually going through your story a few times. But hopefully you found this helpful. Hopefully your students will find it fun.